Okay. A lot of times, people assume that you know how to make a resume. Employers assume that you know how to make a resume. When you show up for an interview, your interview panel will assume that you are already well acquainted with the process of drafting and sending out resumes. And at that point, nobody will pause to instruct you on how this is done. That is why we need to learn this at this point, and hence this little communication skills workshop. Now, a resume is a specific kind of communication. It is professional in nature and it has a specific purpose to serve in that context. It is not an oral communication exercise, but it is written communication which follows certain parameters. And these parameters have to help you to land a job. So, a resume is a tool in that sense. Now, let's go on. In this session, we will see how a resume is structured, what makes the content of a resume, how you can craft a very compelling, a stunning resume which cannot be ignored by anyone who is looking for an employee. What kind of designing and what kind of formatting does a resume require? Do you need cover letters and references? If so, where do you put them? Okay, all of these are concerns which will be addressed in today's session. Now, what is a resume? This is rather redundant at this point because all of you will know what a resume is. A resume is a short document and it will summarize an individual's education, work experience, skills, and achievements in no more than 2 or 3 pages. A resume should not exceed 3 pages. Brevity is the soul of wit when it comes to a resume. You need to keep things brief. You also need to make effective use of bulleted points so that you can easily draw the reader's eye to what is relevant in a sentence, right? So there are a few things that you need to take into account here. One, your education, which is usually listed in descending order. For example, you do not list your primary education first, you list your highest qualification first under education, your latest qualification, right? Then there is work experience. Sometimes as a fresher, you do not have a lot of work experience. But that does not mean you do not have any experience. You will be working on some kind of a project or the other, even as you go through your educational years. So make sure to list out those projects. If not your regular employment, you need to list out those projects by highlighting any skills that you have learned which will be of use to this particular employer, right? Any achievements that you think might be relevant to this employer can also be listed in your resume. What purpose is this kind of a communication going to serve? We already discussed that a resume is a very specific, a special kind of a communication skill. It's not any regular kind of conversation. It is not an oral communication. It is a very standardized business professional sort of communication. And it is always written down. So there are several things that are specific to this kind of a communication. The first of which is that this sort of communication should serve certain purposes for the person who is sending out the resume. It should outline your skills and experience. It should display to the employer that there are certain benefits in hiring you If they hire you as an employee, then their company will enjoy certain benefits as a consequence of that hiring decision. It should be able to grab the attention of an employer. Now, you don't do this with the use of colors or graphics. Rather, you do this by highlighting things that are relevant to the employer and to the job description. That is why a resume should be able to match you to the position that they have advertised. We already discussed things like alignment and fitting with the job description. A resume does this in writing. It gives this in writing. It tells your employer that this person has such and such a skill and is therefore aligning exceptionally well with the job description that you have put out. And thus, a resume should ultimately lead you to an interview, a one on one conversational screening that happens prior to being hired. Okay? Now, there are two words that we use. There is a resume and then there is a CV or a curriculum vitae. A CV is expanded as a curriculum vitae. What is the difference between a resume and a CV? Is there any difference? Now, typically, the difference lies in certain factors that are related to the context in which a resume or a CV is used. Primarily, a resume is used for non-academic positions, and a CV or a curriculum vitae would be used for academic positions. Now, what do we mean by academic positions? It can be the position of a teacher or a professor or a lecturer. It can be the position of a researcher. It can be something that you're sending out in order to have a fellowship or a studentship as part of your university education. It can be something that you are sending out for your master's degree application. So there are specific roles associated with teaching and learning and researching academia, which require you to use a CV and not a resume. However, non academic positions, any regular job in a public or a private sector, would typically require a resume. Now, why is this so? If you are applying for an academic position, then you will need to list out any kind of research project that you have undertaken, any sort of course that you have done, which can help you in this particular research that you are undertaking. Okay? So, when you are applying for an academic position, the document that you submit will need to be longer than 2 to 3 pages. That is what is important here. You can't always summarize your academic qualifications if you are applying for a position in academia by using a 2 to 3 page long document or a resume. A CV, on the other hand, does not have a standard length. It can be longer than 3 pages. This does not mean that it can be interminably long, that it can be very, very long. It cannot be very, very long, but you have a more free margin, let's say. You can use more than 3 pages if you are submitting a CV. Then there is the factor of geographic location. In some places, resume is more commonly used. In some places, CV is more commonly used. Okay? That can be very, very subjective. Ideally, you go through the job description that has been advertised very carefully and study how they have used the word? Have they said that they need a resume or have they asked for a CV? That can be a very helpful way of determining what kind of a document should you be sending out to them. Okay? Now, rather than relying entirely on geographic locations, you rely more reliably on the job description or the position that has been advertised. Okay? You see whether they need a resume or a CV, and accordingly, you structure the document that you are sending out. I hope that is clear to all of you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Any queries so far? Anything that needs clarification?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Let's go on then. Now, there are some things that should necessarily be in a resume. Okay? Some things, on the other hand, are optional. So, here we are discussing not just resume content, but also the structure of a resume. Some things should be there, some things can optionally be there, but regardless of whether it is essential information or optional information, you structure it on the document such that it will serve your purpose. It will essentially land you a job interview. Okay? Now, what are those things that must be there in a resume? Your contact information needs to be there on your resume. And this contact information is something that can change often. So you need to be careful that you have included your current contact information on your resume. A lot of times we draft a resume and then we think of it as a done and dusted job. A resume is never a done and dusted job. A resume is something that is constantly growing and evolving and is therefore in constant need of upgradation. You need to be constantly upgrading and updating. I am really sorry about that. There was some issue with my network. Can you please tell me until where you heard my presentation without any interruptions?
Till contact info, ma'am. After that, the voice wasn't audible.
Okay, so you heard the stuff about how it is necessary to update your contact information?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so make sure that any resume or CV that you send out has your updated contact information. A resume is not one stagnant document. It is not something that you do once and is therefore done for life, not a done and dusted job. Okay? A resume is something that is constantly evolving. Your career is being upgraded all the time. So you need to take care to you need to take care to update your resume as and when required. A resume also necessarily needs to have a resume objective or a resume summary. There is a subtle difference between a resume objective and a resume summary. We'll discuss that difference as we go along in this presentation. You should also include your educational qualifications in your resume. Like we already said, education is always discussed in descending order, both in terms of its temporal sequencing, which was your most recent educational qualification, and in terms of how high that qualification is. Typically, you will list your highest qualification at the topmost part of your education section. You will then go on, let's say you have a doctoral degree or a PhD. Your PhD will come first. Let's say you also have a master's degree. Master's degree comes next. Let's say you then have a bachelor's degree. Bachelor's degree will follow the master's degree. But you would have done it in the reverse order: bachelor's first, master's first, and PhD next. However, you list it in terms of which is the highest qualification, which is the most recent qualification. Okay? Then you list out your work experiences, any skills that you possess, and any achievements that might be relevant to this particular job to which you're applying. Now, about your education. Some people have really high GPAs. Some, on the other hand, do not have very high GPAs. You can include your GPA if it is on the higher side. If it is not on the higher side, omit your GPA. Once you have omitted your GPA, that doesn't mean you can just rest like that. It means that you should give more priority to your skills and experience than to your GPA. Okay? If you do not have a GPA that you can boast about, then you need to be careful to include all skills and experiences that make you stand out as an applicant in your resume. If you put down an unimpressive GPA on your resume, what happens is that since a GPA is always a number, any reader's eye is immediately drawn to that number. And when your employer almost inevitably sees that number, you need to make sure that it is either a really good number or that you avoid their eyes being drawn to that number entirely. Be selective about what you put in your resume. Okay? There are other academic details that might be relevant to your resume. For example, if you've done any minor courses. For example, my minor was development studies. I majored in English studies, but my minor was development studies. And if I'm applying for a position in planning, let's imagine, then my minor will be very relevant for that application. There I can list out my minor courses. I have done this and I have done this, and as a part of that, I have done this project, which made me do this, and therefore I am very suitable to take up this job in planning. Okay? If you have had any academic honors or awards, it can be related to a project that you did. It can also be related to your grades. I hope you understand what I mean. A project does not involve a lot of exam taking and grade giving. However, there is also an element of exam taking and grade giving in your education. So you decide which part of your education makes you stand out as an applicant. If it is that part which includes exam taking and grade giving, you highlight that. If it is that part which includes a lot of real life experience and work, then you add that. Okay? So you are being very choosy here. You're being very selective and you are, in a sense, crafting your resume. It is a craft, right? You can include as a part of your experience any part time jobs, any summer internships that you have done, any outreach or campus involvement programs that you've done, any freelance gigs that you've done, any volunteering, any clinical or practical work that you've done. Now, as you can see here, not all of these are relevant to all disciplines. Clinical and practical work would be more relevant to someone who is very clearly in the sciences, right? Volunteering can be relevant to anybody. Campus outreach can be relevant to anybody. Freelancing can be relevant to anyone who is undertaking a profession related to that particular freelance gig. Okay? So, in a way, you're also selecting what kind of experience matters to this particular job. I hope that is clear to you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, there is one other element which requires mention here. That is, things that do not necessarily fall under any of these high headings. If you have
Excuse me,
completed any, yes, go on.
are you not sharing your screen? Because it's not visible for me.
Why didn't you point that out to me? I'm really sorry. Yes. Okay. Is it clearer now?
Oh,
Yes,
okay,
ma'am.
ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you for pointing it out. I hadn't noticed that after I rejoined the meeting. I'm really sorry about that. Right. So we didn't cover a great many slides or anything. We have just covered this particular slide. We've seen what should be there in our resume, what should be necessarily there in our resume. We have gone on to see a few examples. That is all we have done. Okay. There are some things which do not fall very cleanly or neatly under either of these headings. It might not be about your education, it might not be necessarily about your experience either. But these things can be very relevant to your resume from the perspective of a prospective employer. Any training that you have completed, any kind of training. Now, it's a very interesting thing, a training. Sometimes, if you complete a training, you get a certificate. Sometimes you train yourself to do a lot of things and you do not have certificates to show that you are well trained in it. Now, what do you do in that particular case? A training completion involves a certificate. Let's say you're well trained, you have the skill, but you don't have a certificate to show for it. You don't have anything that is institutional to show for it. Okay? In that case, you include your training under skills. Once you have a skill, regardless of whether someone has certified you or not, it is most certainly a skill that you bring to the table. Okay? So if you have completed a training, complete with certificates and whatever institutional accreditation it brings, then it goes under training. Otherwise, it will go under skills. Is that clear?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, leadership experience, that is also a very vague phrase. What do you mean by leadership experience? Sometimes, when you're applying for certain scholarships, for instance, I'm just giving you an example. When you're applying for certain scholarships, as you know, are very exclusive. Not everybody gets a scholarship. So, if you claim that you have a scholarship, that highlights you as a candidate. It also implies that you have handled some kind of a leadership position in some team or the other at some point in your career. Okay? If you are inducted into that particular scholar community, then they will put you into teams that work in various sectors. I can't always tell you about what sector it is working in. can be about marketing, maybe. It can be about healthcare, maybe. It can be about public policy, maybe. I cannot tell you what sector that particular team might work in, but if you are inducted into a scholarly community or any exclusive community for that matter, you can safely assume that you've handled some kind of a leadership position or the other. In that case, you figure out in what way did I handle a leadership job? What was that leadership job? Then you list out the leadership job, you list out the tasks that you had to handle as a part of the job, and you also make sure to mention whom it was that you worked with. Okay? Who your team, you will have a team, obviously. A leader leads a team. Who was there in that particular team? That can also be mentioned. Okay? Any memberships of or organizations that you are a part of. Licensures are also similar in that case, in that sense, for instance. But licensures are not relevant to all disciplines. For chartered accountants, for instance, licensure is very, very important. Okay? They have a body which licenses a new chartered accountant as a reliable person who can handle other people's accounts. In that case, a licensure is important. Otherwise, a licensure can be omitted. A thesis or a senior project that is relevant to some, not relevant to some. If you are making an academic application, that is very relevant. A thesis or a senior project is that project which you do as a part of the completion of your degree. I had a senior project. In the final year of my integrated MA, I had to do a research project. That would be my thesis, my master's thesis. It can be relevant if I am applying for a position in higher education or a teaching position. Is that clear?
Yes.
Now, as data scientists, you can have two kinds of projects. Okay, I'm just pointing out a small difference here. Sometimes your project can be listed under experience. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Because you're always dealing with data, even your academic projects can be listed under experience. So even if you're not applying for a position in academia, make sure to mention any projects that you do as a part of your training as a data science under your experience. This can be very valuable when you are starting off in your career. That is, you do not have a great deal of work experience. So, what do you mention there? Okay. So, do not just do your project and forget it. Make sure to cite all of these little things that you do in your resume. Build your resume. Okay. Every day you're adding to your resume. Some sections are optional. Technical or computer skills. I do not have any technical skills to boast about. Okay, so usually I omit those sections. Okay, any publications. I do have some publications, so I would add those publications. Publications are relevant, especially if you're applying to academia or if you are if you're applying to a position that requires you to deal with publications. Okay, there can be such positions as well. Publications are not relevant to all positions. Remember that. Languages that you speak. Sometimes they specify, the job description will specify that you need to be acquainted with multiple languages. In that case, languages you speak is a necessary section. Okay? International experiences that you've had, maybe you've had some, maybe you've not had some. Now, this is something that I want to emphasize here. Not all of us has international experiences. Do not think, do not espouse the mindset that a resume is very impressive if it has international experience in it. That is not the case at all. Your resume is not inferior to the resume of somebody who can boast international experiences. Okay? A resume without international experiences can be a lot better than a resume with international experiences if you highlight the right kind of skills and experiences. Volunteering. Volunteering is not for everybody. Sometimes we volunteer for some tasks which cannot be listed on a resume at all, right? Our volunteering experience does not really add to our resume. If you feel like this volunteering experience is not adding to your resume, do not mention it. If your volunteering experience is relevant, then add it. Okay? Course projects, we've already sufficiently covered course projects. I had to do several course projects. I will not list all of them in my resume. I will list some of them in my resume. Okay? Depending on what kind of a position you're applying to, you choose what projects to mention. Now, once again, I need to stop for a second and ask you if you have any clarifications or queries. All good so far?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. Everything is fine.
Are you are you tired?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am.
Okay. Has any of you made a resume so far in your life?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
You
ma'am.
have? How was that for you? What was the experience like? Can you tell me?
Initially, it was so confusing, ma'am, that how to create a resume. Then I searched on Google about what are the
Hmm.
sections, and I started with scrap and
Okay.
adding introduction, competencies, and organizational experience like that. I started,
Hmm.
and after a lot of research and spending a lot of time, I somehow managed to make a resume, but it was not up to the mark. Then, after watching several videos on YouTube and after asking from some of the websites, like they take your resume and then they tell about the mistakes you have. So I asked from them
Yes.
and they told me how to just improve your resume more.
Hmm.
In that way, I made a resume for me.
Did you include all of these necessary sections in that resume?
Not all of them, ma'am. They
But
told
you
me the
included
same
some
thing.
of them.
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. How was it for you, Joshna?
From bookish knowledge, I have presented the resume, ma'am. After
Okay.
presentation, before applying for job, I've shown to my seniors, and they have corrected a bit, and I was successfully able to apply for the job and got
Okay.
selected.
Hmm. So at this point, no one here is drafting a resume. Is anybody trying to make a resume at the moment?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
Ma'am,
So this will.
ma'am,
Yes, Hemant?
I have my resume with me.
I can't hear you. Can you be a little louder?
I have resume with me.
You have your resume with you.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Resume, not resume. Resume is a different word. Resume.
Okay.
Okay. And was it a good resume? Is it a good resume?
Yes, ma'am. I used to send this resume whenever I apply for a job, ma'am.
Okay. I'm glad that some of you have some experience of having drafted a resume. So, in a way, I feel like I am communicating to people who understand what is going on when it comes to resume drafting and tailoring your resume, etc. I hope that the things that we discuss here will come in handy at a later point when you are required to make another resume or when you are required to update your current resume. So, for those of you who have not yet drafted a resume, I just want you to make a note of how even those of us who have drafted a resume here, we struggled with it at first, right? So, it's not that your first draft is your best draft. You make your resume, then you tweak it, you add to it, you edit it, and then you have a presentable resume, right? So it is a process. It is not something that you sit down and make in one day. It's also very continuous. You add to it and you take from it. Okay? That is where the importance of tailoring a resume comes in. Tailoring a resume simply means customizing your resume for the job in that job description. Okay? You don't send out the same resume for multiple jobs. For each job, you take out that resume and you add to it, you edit it, you customize it. Why do we do this? Because each employer has specific needs. A company is looking for an applicant who has some specific qualities, who knows or has some specific skills. And these skills, these qualities are not the same across the spectrum of jobs. They're very, very particular. So you take your resume and you edit it, okay? They also use, that is, employers also use applicant tracking systems, ATS, which will, filter out or filter in your resume depending upon how strongly you align with the needs of the job, right? So, in that sense, it is very necessary to include the buzzwords, the key words that are there in the job description in your resume as well. Okay? Customizing your resume according to a job description shows that you are very intent on getting this job. You're not just blindly sending out resumes here, there, and everywhere. Okay? You know what job you're applying to. You know what this job requires of you. And you are showing your employer all the qualities that your job needs from me. I possess all of those. So, in a way, it reveals to your employer that you really want this job. You're highly motivated and invested. If, for example, the firm is looking for leadership skills, then you list out examples of leadership skills or leadership experiences, leadership positions that you've handled in your resume. Using relevant keywords can help you pass through ATS or applicant tracking systems. Like Anand mentioned, there are several websites that help you draft an effective resume. They give you an ATS score. Okay? This is a very helpful tool. Is this a foolproof tool? No. Is it a fail-safe strategy? No. Okay? None of this is fail-safe. Ultimately, there is only one fail-safe strategy. That is you, the applicant, sitting down, going through your experiences and finding which of these is relevant to your job description. That is the most foolproof strategy. However, you can take the help of these websites in order to make sure that the resume that you have drafted is up to the mark. We're always thinking about ways to maximize our chances of being hired. In the interest of maximizing our chances, we can take the help of these websites. The ones that I have listed here, this is just a few examples. You can find several websites, okay? There is JobScan, there is Resume Worded, there is Top Line Resumes. These are just examples. You can find several websites like this which will give you an ATS score. And on the basis of that ATS score, you can improve your resume. Now, a resume, when you craft it, it needs to have all the information that is required about you listed in a very coherent and easily readable manner. That is, it should not be crammed with text. The space on the page should be sufficiently balanced between text and white space. You avoid the use of any graphics which can take up too much of space on the resume, which can distract your employer, right? You should be very careful about what sits on the page of your resume. A lot of times, if employers use printouts, they will be taking a black and white print of your resume. If you use several colors on your resume, sometimes it can work against you. Okay, this is a chance. I'm not saying that this is exactly how it happens every single time, but there is a chance that this can happen. So be careful about what kind of colors you use in your resume. Ideally, you should use such colors which will not work against you even if there is a black and white print taken of your resume. There should be sufficient white space on the page. Text should be balanced. It should be easily readable. It should be coherently arranged. Now we're going to see how we do all of these things. Okay. Before that, there is something called, we had already seen that there is something called a resume objective or a resume summary. There is a small difference between the two. A resume summary is used if you have several years of experience and you're trying to summarize all of these years of experience into a short paragraph or to a few points, right? So you have to choose those things which are most impressive, most relevant. You cannot add all of your experiences there. If you have several years to summarize, you use a summary. If, on the other hand, you are an entry level applicant, you do not have several years of experience to your credit. In that case, you use an objective. You use a resume objective. You highlight your skills, your education, your ambition, and your motivation so that and you can stand out in front of an employer. Now, this might also make you think as if, wouldn't somebody with several years of experience have an edge over me who is an entry level applicant? That might be true in some cases, but it might also not be true. Okay? Do not prejudge that just because you are an entry level applicant, your resume is going to be weak. That isn't the case. Sometimes entry level applicants bring in a lot of creativity, a fresh slate into a job description, into a job position that they are preferred over candidates with several years of experience. Okay? So do not discourage yourself right at the outset. If you are changing your career, for instance, you have several years of experience, but you are changing your career. You studied engineering, but now you are going into data science. In that case, a resume objective is more apt. That is because the kind of experience you have as an engineer might not be the kind of experience that is required of a data scientist. If, on the other hand, you feel like there is a direct relation between your experiences so far and the role for which you're applying, in that case, a summary would be more apt. Okay? Let's imagine you have a significant gap in your employment history. You did not work for a few years. In that case, instead of summarizing your experience, you try to highlight your skills. So there you once again use a resume objective. Now what I want you to notice here is that in each context, we can use an objective or a summary in order to cater to our specific needs. Each applicant has a set of needs that he or she will want this particular resume to serve. If you have a gap, an employment gap, then it is your need to not draw attention to that particular gap when an employer takes his or her first glance at your resume. That is why we use an objective there instead of a summary. This doesn't mean that you need to be ashamed of any employment gaps in your history. You don't have to be ashamed of any employment gaps in your history. Do not, once again, do not discourage yourself. You do not undervalue yourself. But there is something that you can do when you are trying to answer questions about employment gaps or when you are trying to address your employment gap. Make it sound as if it was your own decision. Regardless of whether it was your own decision or not, make it sound as if this is a conscious choice that you made. You had the option to work. Oh, wait a second. My screen is not visible now, or is this an old message?
Old message only.
Oh, old message. Okay, okay. If you are trying to address the question of an employment gap, you need to make sure that you put it out as if it was your prerogative. You made the decision to take a gap for such and such a reason, and that was a very valued experience in your life. For whatever it was that you took the gap, that particular experience was extremely valuable to your life. Okay? So the gap does not diminish you. The gap, in fact, adds to you. These are just ways in which you can look at your own employment history, your own resume in a positive light. Okay? It is very important for me to address these things even as I tell you the difference between a resume objective and a resume summary, so that if and when you need to use these things, you will not just use them in the correct context, you will also look at your life and experiences in a very positive light. That will make you very confident as applications go, right? Is there any query at this point? Do you understand the difference between a resume objective and a resume summary?
Ma'am,
Yes.
what is ATS score?
ATS is an applicant tracking system. So let's say a company receives a very high volume of applications. Okay?
Thank you, ma'am.
No. I'm not done. I was just checking if you could hear me, Harshit. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Let's let's say a company receives a high volume of applications. So they need to filter out those applications which are not strong, right? So they use a software, and that particular software is called an ATS or an applicant tracking system. They only take in those applications which satisfy the conditions that they require of an applicant. ATS filters out any applications that are received after the deadline. It can filter out any applications that do not sufficiently fulfill the criteria set out by the job description. It can filter out applications from remote locations if they are looking for somebody from the domicile, somebody who lives nearby, somebody who has a particular kind of citizenship. ATS can do all of these things. Think of it as a software that can filter you out if your application is not that strong. Clear?
Okay, ma'am. Clear, ma'am.
Did you understand, Harshit? Because you said thank you, ma'am, even when I was not done answering. Did you actually understand?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I am a first year student. That's why I don't know.
Okay, that's okay.
Actually.
You understood, no?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's good then. Now, a resume summary is almost always necessary if you are applying for a senior level role. If you are applying for a senior level role, then we can assume that you are somebody with several years of experience, because senior level roles do not really hire entry level applicants, right? So, in that case, you would have a resume summary. Let's say you've been working in a particular role for a few years, but now you're looking to change companies. Changing companies, but in the same role. So, all the things that you've been doing until now will be relevant for you in that new job as well. So, there also you can use a resume summary. You can summarize your achievements. Clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes,
There's
ma'am.
one more point here. When you change jobs frequently, there might be several reasons as to why applicants need to change their jobs frequently. Some might be positive reasons, some might be negative reasons. Regardless of what the reasons are, if you are somebody who has had to change jobs frequently, then instead of drawing attention to the fact that you've only worked for 6 months in one particular company, you summarize all the tasks, all the responsibilities that you've handled. Okay? That is it's an easy way out in order to not draw attention to something that might be unpleasant from the point of view of an employer. You give them a summary of what you've done instead of listing out what you've done with timelines. You can choose to do this, okay? You can choose to add any skills that you've picked up from that short stint at any one particular company also. Right. These are two examples. The one on the left is a resume objective. The one on the right is a resume summary. Let's go through it. A resume summary first. Detail oriented, chartered professional accountant with over 9 years of experience, maintaining accurate accounting information for large organizations. Highly analytical professional with extensive accounting software knowledge. Work history includes positions in central banks and investment companies, managing diverse functions as a financial team member. That is a summary. Now we can very easily see how this person's most valuable asset is the experience that this person possesses. Okay? Let's go to an objective now. Ambitious and self motivated candidate with experience in financial reporting and modeling and a master's degree in finance. Knowledge of various accounting software programs, looking for a position as a finance analyst where I can use my skills to achieve organizational goals. Okay? The difference between the two is very starkly visible here, right? When you are an entry level applicant, it is very necessary for you to be highlighting the kind of degree you have, the kind of education you possess, the kind of skills that you bring to the table, the kind of personal qualities that you have: ambitious, self motivated, self starter. Okay? Attention to detail, all of those things are qualities that you bring to the table. Highlighting those is important to an entry level applicant. Your knowledge of software, once again, very necessary for an entry level applicant. Finally, where I can use my skills to achieve organizational goals. Right at the onset of your resume, you have managed to establish an alignment between you as a person and the company and the organization. You are claiming that any skill that I possess will be used to achieve goals that are common to the company, to the group. Okay? Is that clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Any
Ma-
clarifications, any queries?
Ma'am, resume objective should be in the top of the resume, right? And resume summary will come after that, right?
You don't use both of these in the same resume, Biswajit. You use either a resume objective or a resume summary. You don't use both. You use a resume summary if you are an experienced candidate with several years of work in that particular domain to your credit. So your requirement there is to summarize all of that. Okay? You use a resume objective if you are an entry level applicant, if you are a fresher, for instance. And what you have to highlight there is not the number of years of experience that you have, but the kind of education, the kind of skills, the kind of mindset that you bring into this organization. These are two things which serve two different purposes, used in two different contexts. You don't use the two of them together. You only use either an objective or a summary, depending on your own circumstances as an applicant. Is that clear?
Yes, ma'am. Clear. Actually, ma'am, I just got confused with the resume summary. Actually, it should be jobs. Like, we should have write about the job summary. Like after resume objective, we have to. So I mean, resume summary. After that, we have to give the job description, like what you have done in the previous company, isn't it?
It's not about what you've done in any one previous company. You have several years of experience. So, what is it that you've done in this career of yours, which spans several years? What achievements have you been able to garner to your own credit? You have a lot of things to summarize, you have a lot of things to say in that particular case. Let me go back one slide in case that makes it easier for you. These are the situations under which you would use a resume summary. These are the situations under which you would use a resume objective. Clearer now?
Yes, ma'am. Clear now.
Okay. With this, we'll conclude today's session. We'll continue this session on resume writing in tomorrow's session, which will be at 5 p.m. I hope to see all of you guys there. I hope you will be. I hope this particular session was useful for you, and I hope that someday when you need to draft a resume, you will find that you can remember or recollect at least some of these points. Wish you all a wonderful evening ahead. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Ma'am,
You may
ma'am,
now leave the meeting.
before leaving, ma'am, I have a question, ma'am.
No, it's okay. If you have a question, you can stay back. I'll also be there. But the meeting is now done. The session is over. So, in case you need to leave, please feel free to leave. Right, Biswajit, ask.
Yeah, ma'am. Actually, I have two questions. Like,
Hmm.
for my first question is like, what should be the standard page of resume, ma'am? Because, ma'am, actually, when I see in the internet, ma'am, the resume sample, I mean, for experienced and even for freshers also, they have given one page resume, right? But as I asked to my seniors, who has like already got their jobs, so they said that if you have a experience, like you can't write it down everything in a one page resume, right? So you need to take another page to describe your like what you have done in your college project, precisely the projects you have done in your college. So because based on the project, they will interviewer will select you. So or if you are experienced, then based on your experience, what you have done in your previous company, based on that they will select you. So like what should be the pages, ma'am?
Did you join the meeting late, Biswajit?
Yes, ma'am.
Huh, okay. So we had discussed this at the beginning of this session. Typically, a resume is 2 to 3 pages long. Okay. So it should not, ideally, it should not be longer than that. For most business positions, you do not go beyond a 2 page resume. Okay. 2 pages is the standard length. But if necessary, you can extend it to a third page. That is it. A CV can be more than 3 pages long, but a CV's application is specifically in domains related to academia. Clear?
Yes, ma'am. Clear, ma'am. Actually,
Okay.
ma'am, I have seen a few of the samples even from Harvard Business School and Harvard Review and many of the resume, ma'am. So they have shown only one page resume
If
because
you're able to condense all of your achievements sufficiently, adequately into a single page, then that is very good. Okay? It's not a bad practice at all. But if you feel like the length is forcing you to leave out very relevant, extremely pertinent achievements or skills in your career so far, in that case, use a 2 page resume. Think of it as something that you draft on a need basis rather than something that you make in a certain way simply because this is the ideal way to do it. It needs to be short, it cannot be very long. Brevity is key. I do agree with that, but that should not mean that you have to leave out significant parts of your experience and skills. Your skill should be, or rather, your craft should be in being able to accommodate a significant summary of your career in such limited space. Is that clear?
yes, ma'am. Clear, ma'am.
Okay.
And another
Joshna?
ma'am, another question like
1 second, Joshna. Yes,
yeah,
go on.
yeah. So, ma'am, currently, companies are like, I mean, they are applying the ATS system, ma'am. Along with that,
Yes.
they are also applying the AI system right now. Every human resource manager, they have like AI system to filter it out all the all the resume, ma'am. So my question is like how to like stand out from the crowd, ma'am. I mean, what are the things uh, we need to do? I mean, we need to like uh, put in a resume or uh, we need to show that we can like stand out from that crowd and we can do we can in an AI system we can like separate out in an AI system also.
Can I ask you a question, Biswajit?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you write out your own resume or do you ask, do you ask the help, do you requisition the help of AI in writing out your own resume?
Ma'am, currently I do like use Chat GPT. Ma'am. So
Yeah. So if you use an AI system, for example, ChatGPT, then you can also very easily assume that that particular software is giving you results that are very similar to those which it will give to another candidate. There isn't anything essentially unique about the output that is given to you, is it? Do you think there is something essentially unique about the output that ChatGPT would give you as compared to the output that it give to someone else?
no, ma'am. If the
There
same
is
question,
no.
yeah.
Yeah, same questions, same answers also,
If,
right?
if they will, yeah, if they will ask like similar questions, like how to put the resume, then ChatGPT will give almost the same answer, ma'am.
Exactly. So, if you want your uniqueness to show through in your resume, then my first suggestion would be to take the time and do it yourself. Okay? Because regardless of how inexperienced you might be in making a resume, only you know the trajectory that your career has taken in intimate terms, right? So it is very necessary for you to be able to articulate or show that, showcase that in your writing when you make a resume. That makes you stand out, Biswajit. That really makes a difference. It's not like you draft a resume and then leave it there. Drafting a resume is something that takes up months because you make something and then you're constantly tweaking it and editing it. Okay? And when you draft it, make sure to include the keywords that are there in the job description into your own resume. That will show your employer that you are a very good fit for the job. I feel like the fact that you missed some of today's session shows in the questions that you are asking. So I would suggest that you watch the YouTube recording if and when they upload it. Okay?
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. You're welcome. Joshna?
Yes, ma'am. So I'm just curious about like two of my colleagues. One is my senior and another person is my colleague. So what the senior has done that he when he has joined a job, he got after working a few months into the job, he got another offer. So he has
Okay.
jumped into it. After that, he has worked for some time. Like again, he got a better offer, like better package, and he had jumped into it. So how did he
Sometime as in how long?
sometimes maybe 6 months or 1 year. So
Okay.
how did he tweak his resume to convey the HR that I'm fit and I'm not a person who jumps from here to there just for packages? Like how did he present his resume was always I was curious about.
The second question is,
Uh,
there was
uh,
some.
Another, my colleague, what he has done that without informing the current employer, he had applied to another job, and when he has applied to other job, the other job person has called our HR and cross-verified his resume. So then my employer got to know that without any information, he has applied to other employer. Then he got busted
Okay.
obviously. So if like without applying without submitting a relieving, if I want to apply to other employer, how should I convey in my resume, how should I present it to the interview panel?
See, there is something that I need to ask here. Why is it that the other employer called your present company's HR to verify his resume?
To cross verify how he's working, and yeah, the my colleague was in marketing. So, is he worthy of it to cross verify his work?
Had the HR, had the applicant put in the reference, put in someone there in your current company as a reference?
No, ma'am. I have asked him, like, did you refer anyone? He has said, no, I haven't referred.
That is a very strange occurrence, actually. I mean, it is actually something that I find very strange. These companies, the companies, are they in any way, either locationally, are they located nearby, or are they, engaged in some kind of business relations? Is there some sort of a transaction between these companies? Something that.
No, ma'am. Like, there was no connection with the other company. Both companies were in the same field, pharmaceuticals, and my
Okay.
colleague was an marketing representative head. So, to know his performance, they have called.
See, I think what can be done in the second case, for example, in the case of the colleague, I think what can actually be done is to give a reference, because I find it very odd. I really do find it odd that the new company would call your present company's HR to cross verify his resume. Because what is more preferable in that case, if you feel like there is a chance of this happening, what you do is you give a reference. You cite the name of somebody who is willing to cross verify your credentials for the sake of your new employer, if and when required. A reliable reference. In that case, they have the option to contact this particular person. I feel like this particular colleague, he took a risk. And honestly, I respect the fact that he took a risk because we might not always be comfortable in the jobs that we are doing. If we are, that is great. That doesn't mean we need to stay stuck to that job. So he took a risk, but I don't think he was careful enough to think of this particular eventuality. That is true. If you are scared of this happening, then it would be preferable to add the name of a reference who can sufficiently vouch for you, who can speak for you. Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
So, about the first one, about the company jumping, once again, I personally, I do not take the view that is something negative on the part of the applicant. I feel like in this kind of an economy, it is something that we are forced to do for our own sake. Okay. So, in that case, I do not think of it as something that he should not have done, he or she should not have done. Okay. Now, about changing your roles frequently, as we discussed in the case of a resume summary, instead of listing out, if you feel like now 1 year at one particular company, I don't think that is very bad at all. 6 months, if you have done that multiple times, then that might reflect poorly on your morale. Yes, that can. It can be, it can't be very good for your work ethic. It can't reflect very well on your work ethic. I'm really sorry for stumbling so many times. So, what you do there is that either you only list out your skills or anything that you've picked up, any kind of positions that you would like to summarize rather than specify. Okay? If you are specifying, on the other hand, you can also take the option to downplay certain professional responsibilities that you've handled. Let's say, for an example, this is just an example. I worked in a company for 2 years. Let's imagine. And I then shifted to another company. There I only worked for 6 months. Okay? And then I went on to work in another company where I worked for, let's say, a year. Then I once again jumped companies. Once more, it is a 6 month company, right? A 6 month tenure, let's say. And here I have two 6 month commitments which I do not want to draw attention to. In that case, I can choose to very cleverly either not mention them or mention them as unimportant. I mean, comparatively unimportant, not entirely unimportant, comparatively unimportant responsibilities that I have handled. Okay. So I don't necessarily need to, let's imagine my latest position is working as a teaching assistant. So I've been doing that for a few years. So I do that. I list from this particular date to this particular date. Before that, let's imagine I had a 6 month commitment, which I don't really want to mention. I don't really want to mention that here. So I don't mention that here. Before that, let's imagine I had another commitment, which I'm rather proud of. So I do mention that from this particular year, this particular month, this particular year to this particular month, this particular year. So all the things that are highlighted are the things that I want highlighted. That doesn't mean I need to completely blot out my 6 month experiences. I can also mention, for example, in my resume summary or at a later position, later stage when I discuss my responsibilities and skills and experiences, I can also mention as one bulleted point maybe, I have also handled such and such a responsibility at such and such a firm for short durations. I could do that. So essentially, I'm not blotting out anything, but I am choosing those elements of my career to which I want the employer to be drawn to. Is that clear?
Okay, ma'am. If the interview panel asked me like why the 6 months gap, so can I say the responsibilities which were presented to me were not up to the par which I have expected from them?
You could phrase it a little better. I mean, that's not a bad answer at all. But you could say, like, see, you've not highlighted that particular experience. During that period, I was handling a few responsibilities at such and such a firm. You could mention that. You don't have to be ashamed of it. But that is not a position in which I wish to remain in the long run because it did not afford me sufficient opportunities for growth, maybe. You don't have to make them feel as if you were disappointed by that experience. You're very proud of it. Make it sound as if you were very proud of it. You are proud of it, but that's not a role in which you wish to remain because you are very ambitious. Rightfully, you should be ambitious. Is that okay?
Okay, ma'am. And ma'am, if I'm writing the resume objective, it must be placed in a resume at the beginning. And if I'm presenting a resume summary, like if I have many experiences, I have to present it at the end of my resume.
No,
The
resume summary also goes in the beginning.
Okay, ma'am.
A resume summary also goes in the beginning of a resume. But the thing is, even though these are both considered to be essential elements of a resume, I have seen resumes without either a resume objective or a resume summary. And they were not necessarily bad resumes. Okay? This is
Okay,
the
ma'am.
standard format in which you can draft a resume.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome. Is that all? Any more questions?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you everybody then for joining me. We'll end the session now. Wish you
Thank
all a
you, ma'am.
wonderful evening ahead.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.